If a new life has to be born, its seed has to be dead. Whether or not you are a fan of rebirth or reincarnation narratives, it has always raised a lot of engaging discussions as to how the process should go, even in questions where we ask about the conditions that make life suitable or where a soil can be primed for cultivation. We just never disregard the importance of the process of origin. For the case of the new amphoreus story update, we have explored the ideas of rebirth through Dan Heng as he shouldered Earth, where the past narratives tied him to Dan Feng and the Vidyadhara, whose history painted controversies in the annals of the Xianzhou. And now we are introduced to his yet new form in Permansor Terre, but also aligns it with the ongoing narrative with Terravox. Now, I assume that you have done the new Trailblaze Mission, because as the events of the story unfolded, Dan Heng served himself a new purpose as the guard of the Astral Express and the Trailblaze. I find this specificity quite indicative of the rebirth narratives, and it clearly drew the line between what makes a return to flesh a rebirth or reincarnation. The latter can be more distinguished to the narrative identity of Dan Heng, with his Imbibiter Lunae form be so plausibly interpreted as him being under the shadow of his previous incarnation as Dan Feng. That is, of course, considering that Dan Feng's circumstances were part of the sentence imposed against him by the Xianzhou. However, for today's main subject, I don't intend to explore the idea of what cultivates a new life primarily through Dan Heng, but instead, this can not only be explored in itself, but also can be applied in the philosophies and the lore of the larger world building of Honkai Star Rail. All would be possible through this character who's been serving the game as the most lovable companion and most enigmatic foreshadowing. March 7th. Then at least stay with me as I explore the possible origins of both March and Evernight, what this tells us about the nature of Fuli and the Path of Remembrance, how the Path of Enigmata is one of the keys to new life, and how the Remembrance might be one of the four paths that push the universe to its end. I'm Merkanique, and I welcome you to Deep Dive. Setting the stage. The Evernight Paradox. We started the story update from the cliffhanger with Dan Heng and Evernight, where the former was visibly agitated by the latter's presence that takes on the appearance of his close companion. He asserts that she should leave March's body, only for her to suggest in refutation that it may have been March who regained her memories. Now, if you look back, there has been a heavy narrative momentum being shaped around March 7th's past. We get to know bits from the Garden's motives of barring her away from her sealed past, and some implicit clues from the interaction she had with a true sting hallucination back in version 1.5. But it is during amphoreus that the puzzle pieces started connecting together. It made it obvious from the beginning that March will play a highly pivotal role, given how she was initially unable to join the Trailblaze duo due to her being frozen in place, rendering her under similar states to coma. It just came into light for us that March wasn't actually unconscious, and was in fact first to arrive in amphoreus before the two even did. She was there for 97 days before coming into terms with the reality that no one could perceive her anymore, prompting Evernight to step into the scene to fulfill her ongoing wish of reuniting with her companions and making sure that the trailblazing journey continues. Now, the first thing that quickly raises my questions is how Evernight constantly emphasizes her protectiveness, or the excess of such, towards March. From her voice lines to her agendas, she's so stubborn with her ways of ensuring that March's wishes are fulfilled, going as far as distorting memories in key places where the Express crew members have gone before. And this exact method was where my question was founded at its core. How did Evernight manage to get access to these memories that she was able to utilize them to further her agendas of protecting March? As of now, I could think of two possibilities. One is that somehow, since Evernight has always been with March in her journeys, she was able to gain access to those key places through March's camera, where she might have recorded memories of those who weren't completely aware of the omniscient state of that memory. I'm not saying that March is omniscient, but you can compare this closely to a cameraman who can capture a view that those presently involved in the photo couldn't completely perceive. Second is that the existence of memories themselves might have direct ties to March, considering she bears the title Pure Child of Anasrava, among many others like Cyrene, who were all speculated of being tightly connected to the Remembrance Aeon Fuli. But either way, if Evernight is being insinuated to be the Remembrance Path Strider responsible responsible for the surge of Memoria Tide, then this only fortifies her connection to Fully by virtue of her coexistence with March. At the same time, this would create a concurrent contradiction because both Evernight and the Garden were protecting March, and yet they are both protecting her from the other concerning party. This then would create a sound speculation that Evernight is a cremator, or at least someone who does similar work as them. But near the end, Evernight wanted March to forget the title of pure Child of Anasrava, and she didn't really discard any of the memories she had access to. In fact, she holds memories, especially those of March 7th, preciously. Maybe some of those memories contained encrypted and indecipherable content, but that was part of Evernight orchestrating the Memoria Tide surge and exercising her power of oblivion. Not necessarily something a rogue memo keeper can do on behalf of the cremators. So if Evernight rejects the significance of the pure Child of Anasrava, goes against the Garden, wants to kill the Remembrance yet exists symbiotically with March 7th, what then is her origins? If Evernight was the same past March was being protected from, and the term pure Child of Anasrava can be treated as a simplified reference of her origin, does that mean that Evernight too is a pure Child of Anasrava? If not, meaning Evernight just comes into existence as a contrast to March and the Remembrance, how can we explain the respective origin and possible contrasting nuance that might have come with Cyrene? This is where we dive deeper into the term pure Child of Anasrava and further examine Fully and their fragments as different points of origin. Shifting the spotlight, the properties and the occurrence of light. Although mysterious on the surface, the Remembrance is actually a relatively manageable path to grasp. I would even argue that it's easier to understand than the other widely available paths such as the Hunt and the Abundance. By motif, it shares close inspirations with the Abundance due to its ties to Buddhism and green nature thematic. The Abundance evidently approaches these inspirations in a more religious touch, whereas the Remembrance leans into more esoteric and mystic approach with the use of tarot and other divination practices. Apart from that, the Remembrance symbol features a candle, which if you don't know is already referenced in Evernight's character detail description. And it's fascinating because in the same text, you would also see another Remembrance-related object motif being mirrors. As an extension, this is well incorporated in the story with the inclusion of the Memo Snatcher trying to steal Noose's memories by hiding themselves in one of Herda's mirrors. Even in the latest questline, the symbolic presence of mirrors are constantly being reinforced, with an example being Sunday describing Evernight as a reflection that instead shows a bottomless abyss. So from these instances, we can extrapolate more examples as to how the Remembrance makes themselves present beyond the known involvement of the concept of memories. Now, what do these have to do with March's and Evernight's origins? Well, their contrast offers a major insight on how we should approach the lore of characters who have strong connections to Fully. If we revisit the current update's questline, you would notice that there were only 2 instances where both March and Evernight are present. The first one is in the Abyss of Fate, where Lygus caught up to March's presence, urging the latter to make that pivotal split-second decision of merging with Evernight. Take note that Lygus only managed to perceive the presence of March and not Evernight. Evernight only added that Lygus may perhaps have already seen their essence, to which my guesses would point to the likelihood of their ties to the Remembrance. Now, the second one is in Aedes Elysiae, which occurred after Cyrene, through the form of Mem, managed to reach the Trailblazer, prompting them to take a photo of Evernight. This takes both Cyrene and Evernight to Aedes Elysiae, but they would also be joined by March. Evernight realized that she was transported into a light cone made from someone's memories, as Cyrene welcomes her and tells her that the memory would also belong to her. Okay, with these 2 instances, we can map certain key information and come up with a synthesis. First, the memories of the Aedes Elysiae light cone is no doubt Cyrene's, but it wouldn't be possible for memories to just be used in creating the light cone. Light cone themselves are technology of the Garden of Recollection, so the manifestation of memories isn't as refined as when accessing the fragment of recollection, speaking of which we will discuss about later. While the game presents light cones as these card-looking items equivalent to Genshin's weapon, they aren't actually cards. They aren't comparable to photo cards either, because if you take a closer look on the asset design, the contents of the light cone is somewhat loosely placed in between two sheets of glass film. So if the lore also describes light cone as technology containing not just memories, but also experiences and abilities, then they must be the differing factors that yield light cones with different effects and image content. The main method and catalyst in the creation of such would perhaps be the same. And given what happened before Evernight was transported into the light cone, I think that light cones, from the way we see it, are just reflections of light, hence the name. It also makes sense due to how glass textures are also visual motifs tied to the remembrance, meaning the two glasses of the light cone are responsible for the image appearing through multiple reflections. It's also interesting to note that if you don't equip a light cone to a character, it will just display a transparent film. So light cones are perhaps made thanks to the presence of light and the use of someone's memories as base. In the case of the scene with Evernight, she was transported into the memories that belong to Cyrene and realizes that it was a light cone thanks to a light source that catalyzed its creation. And the only light source present there was none other than the flash of March's camera. So does that mean that any instantaneous light source such as the flash of a camera is capable of manifesting light cones? Genuinely, I don't think that's how it works, especially since March's camera is a unique case. Of course, not anyone with a camera can just procure a light cone to record someone else's memories. But if we go back to those two scenes where the Trailblazer snaps a photo of Evernight, with Cyrene being present as well as the conversation among the three pink-haired beauties in the Aedes Elysiae light cone, the presence of Cyrene in both scenes gives a crucial hint on how the condensation of memories into light cones actually work. Moreover, it's a strong lead for us to understand how the remembrance actually works, as well as how Fully manages to record any event that occurs in the cosmos, despite their ways being seen as rather obscure. Remember that both Cyrene and March bear the title Pure Children of Anasrava, and that title carries heavy connotation, implying that as close to emanators of remembrance. Just by being emanators alone, we can draw a simplified analogy of how an Aeons path works. Earlier in the events of the story, Cyrene tries to navigate her way around the maze Evernight conjured thanks to the Memoria Tide, and then she stumbles upon a camera protected by Evernight's memo sprites, to which it then automatically flashes and transforms into a prismatic colored version of the same memo sprite. This series' imagery, in my opinion, is actually a brilliant narrative method and symbolic approach, because not only does it faithfully show Evernight's protectiveness of March, but it also throws us back to the earlier Trailblaze quest in amphoreus. Here, I am talking about Orynyx's revelation that the Trailblazer was just a walking memory and that they needed to ask for Castrus's assistance to recover their body to return to life again, since Fully's gaze fortunately kept the Trailblazer's memories intact. I think a similar crisis was happening for March 7th. She stands in as the camera not only as a symbol tied to her keepsake, but also because a part of her consciousness still exists in that camera. This connects strongly to March's explained scheme of switching bodies with Evernight and hiding her last flicker of consciousness within the veil of Orynyx. Cyrene was bewildered with the possibility that March is leaving it up to chance, but she knew the Trailblazer well enough that she places immense faith in them snapping the photo. What I find brilliant about this is that it narratively reframes the same situation with the Trailblazer and Castrus. March 7th here is in the same predicament as the Trailblazer once did. Evernight did say that she was already an empty soul that time. Truth is, her stakes were just as crucial because she was suspended in ice as her consciousness flickers away. Then you have the Trailblazer, who somewhat played the same role as Castrus, considering the camera can be taken as March's core consciousness, similar to the Trailblazer's living body. Without the Trailblazer, March's situation might have been in greater peril, but the main focus here would be on Cyrene, who was able to find the camera amidst the Memoria Tide, which made March 7th from the camera re-manifest as a prismatic Eevee. Now, I might look like I'm just stretching things out to get to a point, but Cyrene's involvement have always been different parts of a puzzle. We even started the quest with Cyrene suddenly disappearing from the exomyth on the onset of Evernight's havoc. But this is the Memoria Tide we are talking about. For someone to be tasked with finding the Trailblazer and Dan Heng under similar circumstances within the crisis is not to be delegated to anyone of any feat. They are trying to outsmart Evernight here, whose plans are just as devastating as Xandar's, so enlisting the help of another pure Child of Anasrava would make sense. Going back, the instance where the camera snapped a photo followed March's manifestation as a memo sprite was only triggered when Cyrene discovered it. More than March 7th just asking for help, I don't think it's a simple trigger for plot convenience. Cyrene discovering the camera with her very own eyes tells us the crucial point that allows us to understand the remembrance more. If we put it into analogy, her discovery of the camera is analogous to Fuli's gaze onto the Trailblazer, which allowed his memories to stay intact. Without Cyrene's gaze, March's gamble on hiding her last bit of consciousness would have led her to her demise. Hence, she was able to bring with her the camera and handed it over to the Trailblazer to snap a photo of Evernight. This then leads to the light cone scene where March was expected to be present, due to her essence being contained within the camera. So it wasn't actually the camera's flash that produced the light cone, but was instead March's vision. Again, the camera plays a symbolic factor because its lens can be comparable to that of eyes, and by snapping a photo, it's able to record memories similar to how someone can retain a memory from what they see. This is how March's presence was still felt, and it's how she could see amphoreus through Dan Heng and the Trailblazer's journey. So far, we have light and eyes that make up for the remembrance main motifs, but we are not done yet. We need to cover the mirrors. Apart from Herta's mirrors and Sunday's use of the reflection analogy, the motif of mirrors are well abundant throughout Amphoreus. Bringing back the light cone designs again, we could already treat the two glass films as mirrors themselves. But I also mentioned about the existence of the fragments of recollection throughout Amphoreus, and this is where I'll expound on them. You see, after the Trailblazer was gazed upon by Fuli and gained access to the Path of Remembrance, we started seeing a lot of crystal shard that, when interacted upon, would show a memory of certain events that occurred in that specific area. This, I think, is another nuance that fall within the motif of the eyes, especially since the Trailblazer at that point can be considered as closely connected to the remembrance. But take note that even if Ligus was able to see these same fragments that contain the eternal recurrence cycles, they wouldn't necessarily be exceptions because 1. Ligus mapped time to the Path of Remembrance, which is unfortunate for him since this specific track has been his bane. It's where anomalies are being instantiated into his experiment. 2. Ligus is also aware of the past cycles given that he's overseeing the experiment's runtime for Iron Tomb's deep learning. So it would be similar to saying that Ligus is the omniscient mastermind of everything that has happened in Amphoreus. And of course, the Trailblazer didn't know about any of it until Ligus himself showed him the eternal recurrence cycles. It just so happens that in the eyes of the Trailblazer, who was growing through remembrance, the eternal recurrence cycles would manifest as fragments of recollection. And 3, the program the experiment is under belongs to the overall system of As I've Written, which is a console key that belongs to the remembrance. Now, I have to admit that this confuses me, because it would raise a question as to whether Amphoreus first existed as its own world independent of the scepter due to the presence of the remembrance. Before going to Amphoreus, Black Swan told us that it's also being fettered by the Path of Remembrance among the 3. But how would it be possible if Fuli only gazed on Amphoreus upon the Trailblazer's arrival? Unless Fuli gazed twice, I simply don't think it's unintended to be like that. Besides, Cyrene has always been an Amphoreus, existed in every cycle where she dies in the beginning, yet somehow she still got re-instanced as Mem when the Trailblazer grows through the remembrance. Maybe that can explain the remaining plot holes in Amphoreus. But going back in track, whenever the Trailblazer interacts with these fragments, it expands and alters the surrounding area and projects images of people involved with a specific event that happened in that area. These people would appear like crystalline, highly reflective glass figures. However, I don't think that it alters the surrounding areas in actuality, but rather it presents the alteration in respect to the perceiver, which again brings us back to the motif of eyes through the Trailblazer. So we can say that on the right eyes, certain areas can be manually perceived, as if you're using a switch to turn the memory superimposition on or off. But due to the temporal constraints of the present, these areas would just appear as they are. It's just that there are memories present. It makes more sense now why Black Swan would tell Himeko that the present doesn't actually exist, and the future is just a possibility that can be converted into memoria, which is all that the past comprises. So similar to a light cone, the contents of these fragments of recollection are due to the multiple reflections of light, which effects draw similar to memoria in a sense that they defy temporal constraints of the present. I really wanted to talk about the concept of time compression from Final Fantasy VIII and how it ties to this temporal dynamic in Star Rail, but I don't have time to insert this segment, and I actually plan to discuss it in another video, which would include the phenomena with Diridith and the anomaly of the sibling spaceship in Notcry. But basically, the memory light, as I come to coin it myself, doesn't really care about the rules of time. It would only rely on who are capable of perceiving it and how it would go through multiple reflections to form an image. And I think that they are complementary in a sense that the concept of mirrors and reflections can go hand in hand with the motif of eyes and light. However, since we are talking about light and we rehashed the role of reflections in materializing memories, it would tangentially be important to talk about light refraction. In case you don't, if reflection bounces off light upon hitting something and redirects it in multiple directions, refraction does the opposite. It absorbs light as it passes through something while also being able to distort, bend, and redirect it in multiple directions. For this case of further understanding the remembrance, we can have it easier by treating light as information or memories. You have crystalline transparent materials like the fragments of recollection and the two glass films in light cones that perfectly demonstrates the reflection aspect. They allow for the materialization of memories by causing multiple reflections of light that is enough to manufacture some sort of an image. But given how I come to coin the memory light in addition to memoria, we can also take it as memories being able to use mirrors and other transparent surfaces to travel from different points. And why would memories even travel, you may ask? This is where the entire mystery surrounding Fuli is taken into consideration. We knew from Evernight's Myriad Celestia teaser that March was born thanks to the shattering of the Lumen Flux, which was implied to be Fuli. Those born from the shattered fragments would be the pure children of Anasrava, each speculated to contain various facets of said Aeon. But when the Trailblazer gains access to the Path of Remembrance, Fuli was shown to have gazed on them. This brings us back to the problem with As I've Written, where we raised a possible exception that Fuli gazed twice on amphoreus, and it seems that specific information about pure children of Anasrava gave us crucial hints, because at present in amphoreus we have two of such women, March and Cyrene. It's possible that Fuli has gazed on amphoreus long before Lygus began with the experiment, which makes sense with the prior existence of both Cyrene and As I've Written. This would be Fuli's gaze through Cyrene. Then we have the non-existent memory of the Trailblazer, which prior to that required us to make an audience with Orynyx. They somehow got their attention due to the camera reminding Orynyx of Mother. After being gazed upon by Fuli, Mem appears and Orynyx tells Mem to go with them. This would be Fuli's gaze through March within the camera. And at this point, I could now piece the puzzle with this. So, Fuli gazed into amphoreus first before the experiment went underway, which created the presence of Cyrene. Now, what sets the Cyrene apart from the Cyrenes in the cycles is that this Cyrene was the ripples of past reverie. Philia 093 was part of the later stages of the experiment, whose electrical signal only appeared briefly in the Forgotten Years. And if you look at the other entries related to Cyrene in the console, Philia 093, Mem, and the Great Tomb of the Nameless Titan, information was obscured and incomplete. With the entry of ripples of past reverie being completely obscured, it just tells us that Lygus has been in fact too late, because the Remembrance set their sights on amphoreus first. The true Cyrene was hidden within the Veil of Evernight in the same way March did in her merging with Evernight, and showing Orynyx the camera allowed Cyrene, that time Mem, to make their way to the Trailblazer by traveling through the reflections of the Express. So given that pure children of Anasrava are born from Fuli's shattered crystalline fragments, and each being a different facet of the Aeon, we can definitely say that Fuli is everywhere. Perhaps that is how the Aeon Swan manages to record every single memory that exists in the universe. It didn't need to be through Fuli's gaze only, but it suggests that the remembrance can still search through by simply letting these pure children witness, as these are fundamentally tantamount to Fuli's gaze. In a way, we can understand these pure children as surveillance of the remembrance, but I think that would apply more accurately to the memo keepers and memo snatchers of the garden. But at the same time, these pure children have dual functions that accommodate both the refraction and the reflection of light. Refraction because they themselves absorb and store memories, which was the fundamental purpose of the remembrance, and reflection due to their capability to project memories and allowing those who are joined with them to be able to see the projected memories, such as the case with the Trailblazer and Cyrene or Mem. So in a way, we can understand Fuli and the remembrance by virtue of the sense of sight and the three motifs we discussed earlier, and then come to make further sense of many examples where factions of the remembrance are involved, such as when Black Swan saw the truth of the Express's defeat against Sunday, which prompted her to wake the Trailblazer up for the real battle. It's important to note here that she also used an empty light cone to show them the memories of what actually happened. That's why members of the garden are often taken seriously, because they can easily get into the truth of things no matter how private it is. That is why Herta is keeping an eye on her mirrors and preventing memo snatchers to peer into Noose's memories, or why there is just as equal memory with the garden being able to breach amphoreus' firewall to witness the fall of Noose. Fuli isn't just some frozen-looking crystalline figured Aeon, and perhaps we must shift our perception in seeing them as instead rays of light that watches, remembers, and projects. Knowing this, perhaps we can come closer to understand the motive behind Evernight's use of oblivion and her radical methodology despite harboring good and protective intentions. And so, we shift our sight into the other side of the coin, where one side shines its light, and this time, we explore the side that prefers to snuff it all out, leaving memories in pitch dark blindness. Into deeper depths, Novelty and the Enigmata. Earlier, I've raised the question about the possible origins of Evernight in relation to March. That would be whether she was also once a pure child or whether she manifested somewhere else. But we eventually knew that she wants to kill the remembrance, and her protectiveness over March places her in rough opposition against the garden. Her power of oblivion was later revealed to be that of the Enigmata, but throughout the events of the story, we only knew what it does by implicit means. In the beginning parts of the quest, Evernight also mentions stepping into the reign of sensation and tells the Trailblazer who deserves to be forgotten and who deserves to be remembered. Clearly, this gave people the idea that Evernight might have been a cremator. But while the aim is strikingly similar, the cremators are doing it as a favor for their Aeon, framing the act as a way of filtering memories. Evernight's aim, while also framed as filter, isn't concerning memories in themselves. Her explicitly talking about who deserves to be forgotten and remembered gives the impression that this is more specific and targeted in what, or rather who, she discards. And so we can establish this dynamic as Evernight being independent from the ways of the remembrance, like some sort of a memory filtering vigilante. Her power of oblivion seems to work in opposition with how the remembrance preserves memories. If the remembrance makes one remember even memories before one was conscious due to its manifestation with light, then oblivion makes one forget by neutralizing this memory light. If a while ago I suggested that maybe Fuli manifests as ray of light, then using oblivion to kill the remembrance makes complete sense. But I don't think this means plunging the entire cosmos into deep darkness. I mentioned earlier that not every light source can be used as catalyst to materialize a memory within a light cone, so I don't think oblivion is a matter of erasing any visible light. If ever, we would have two possible interpretations of oblivion based on what we both have seen and implied so far. First was that oblivion negates the memory light, meaning that it tampers with the memory we have seen. We saw this when Evernight revealed to us that the core flame of time was never returned, in contrast to what we've known since arriving to amphoreus. Another example were the wiped out texts during the jumbled navigation sequence amidst the Memoria Tide, and with how these are also present in the amphoreus experiment logs, oblivion might also be behind the forgotten years. The second one is that oblivion introduces something else in place of the memory light. If I were to give applicable examples, this could be those in the Trailblazer's non-existent memory who were not supposed to be there, or the presence of the Express crew briefing thinking about their next stop in the Reverie Hotel instead of the parlor car. Or it could be when March 7th interacted with a true Sting during the Argenti quest, where from her viewpoint, she had a foreshadowing encounter with Evernight herself. The reason why I felt an urge to suggest this second interpretation is due to the fact that when the power of oblivion is revealed to be the Enigmata, this further confirms my personal hunch that at some point, amphoreus would be an overarching introduction for the Enigmata. And from what we know of the Enigmata from the databank, entries about its Aeon mythos and the simulated universe, they have a strong connection with the Remembrance due to mythos' speculated birth from the Path, and they also actively go against the erudition to challenge their imposed certainties. Then, if you look at the three paths fettering amphoreus with this in mind, you would of course exclaim that there would be no way the Enigmata wouldn't be involved, especially when both Nous, through the certainty of the equation, and Fuli, through means of scattering the seeds of remembrance, choose to align with destruction. The Enigmata would be the Express's best bet to match the scale of chaos that Iron Tomb could bring. Just imagine when you ally with a path capable of destroying history, creating confusing possibilities at the expense of certain comfortable truth, and harming other entities just by misinformation. You would no doubt be godlike in the face of Lord Ravagers like your Senator Armstrong feeling invincible with the sources you just made the fuck up. So even in the first interpretations I raised, the Enigmata isn't about erasure or removal of any sorts. Just like the Remembrance, it can affect anyone by targeted influence. Similar to the concept of memory light, perhaps it is easier to link the Enigmata's equivalent to that of noise light. By noise, what I mean is anything that messes with any information or memory, such that those who perceive them can experience different reactions like going mad as in the case of Dewayne, becoming confused, or at some cases, even becoming curious. At some point, I think that the reason why one of the Enigmata's concept is named Rain of Sensation is because it's meant to overwhelm the senses in frequency similar to torrential rain. But what's funny is Evernight has a voice line about good memories being compared to endless rain, and that her bringing of an umbrella is a metaphorical expression of how these good memories tend to be fleeting. So the bottom line of this is that the Enigmata is not really a negating path, because when you have the erudition pushing for an absolute certainty in adherence to hard data, the Enigmata just tampers with it to make a conclusion uncertain and more flexible to possibilities. This is the gist of their main conflict with erudition. Or even with the Remembrance, the Enigmata challenges the truth that memories try to show, because when they give someone something else to remember, even if they don't recall them being part of their memory, they would be inclined to figure out where it falls with the other memory. Meaning, the Enigmata, through the analogy of our noise light, replaces any existing information with a highly malleable open blank, so that whatever manifests or is put in that blank will eventually make sense, even if what manifests is nothing. The Enigmata allows novelty through interpretation and possibilities, in a way that by challenging problems such as the origin of the cosmos, the prime mover of life, or how rebirths occur, it's in invalidating these conundrums that the Enigmata could provide new life. Perhaps when it comes to March, Evernight's removal of her memory as pure Child of Anasrava could have been Evernight placing herself as a replacement of that memory. Besides, she was the intended past of March, and this achieves Evernight's aim of protecting March from the garden through the path of Enigmata. But we are yet to explore what Evernight meant by the seed needing to be dead, nor the plausible theories as to how Mythos was born from the Remembrance. Maybe it's in the last section that we get to find out how Evernight truly manifested, what can be truly achieved by killing the Remembrance, and how the same path could be the beginning or the end of Cyrene. Eyes closed. Imaginations, cycles, and freedom from suffocation. During the segment where the Trailblazer had to navigate through the Memoria Tide, they made their way to a memory in Herta Space Station, the same area where Kafka and Silverwolf retrieves the receptacle to wake it up with a Stellaron. Kafka mentioned 4 paths that would bring the universe closer to its end. 3 of those consist of destruction, harmony, and nihility, with the 4th one being obscured. This has now created tons of speculations among lore experts, with many of their commenting audience sharing their fair share of theories. But personally, when I saw the obscured message, the first thing that came to mind was the length of the supposed text, and so I also felt the urge to count the number of squares that would fit the letters, and it turns out that 2 paths can fill in this obscured message based on length: remembrance and propagation, having 11 letters. Now, we know how much the propagation has been portrayed to have caused catastrophe all throughout the history of the universe, so it wouldn't be much of a surprise if it turns out that the propagation is one of them. But my aim for this video isn't to claim credibility nor come to an accurate prediction or theory like the lore enthusiasts. Especially given the trajectory of the topic throughout this video, I aim to explore why the remembrance could be the 4th path. Now, in the beginning of this video, I dedicated a portion of the intro explaining the difference between rebirth and reincarnation and how Danhang is a perfect case study to distinguish the difference. Thing is, rebirth is also a keyword for the remembrance, and we can catch a glimpse of it in the loading screen. When the universe approaches its end, Fuli is said to record all that has been forgotten to prepare for the universe's rebirth. So in a way, the remembrance functions as the universe's origin, and it falls in line with how amphoreus is set up, with its history tying to the 3 paths. But I'd like to bring up 2 subjects here that are not just thematically linked to the remembrance, but also expansive around the themes of rebirth. These 2 being Buddhism, the branch of spirituality that the remembrance is majorly influenced from, and the Eden of Blessed Insight, the said abode of the Aeon Fuli. Let me start with Buddhism. One of the concepts that are of strong connection to the remembrance while being tied to Buddhism is the title Pure Child of Anasrava. The word Anasrava is a Sanskrit Buddhist term that refers to the pure, innocent, and wholesome essence of thoughts and feelings. According to the wiki entry, Anasrava is the opposite of asava, which then refers to craving for existence, desires, attachments, and even ignorance, all of which keeps the cyclic progression or samsara. Given that this game is a sibling to Genshin Impact, I'm sure many of you are no strangers to the term samsara, but take note that there is a semantic opposition to Anasrava being the klesha, which denotes these unwholesome feelings and thoughts, basically anything that contains malicious essences. All 3 terms would all be equally important, but since we are examining the involvement of rebirth, we could instead focus on asava and its associated concepts. It may seem confusing to differentiate asava and klesha due to both being oppositions to Anasrava, but both of these link to the perpetuation of samsara. My personal understanding is that asava is the overarching concept to these kleshas, but not every desire, influx, or cravings that make up for asava is a klesha. You can desire a neutral or good thing and still be tied to asava, and I think that with these, we can even compare the concept to a much more familiar one we know, which is karma. Karma can be both good and bad, and the thing about karma is that it's something that you both receive from past lives and plant for your future lives. Considering Buddhism supports the idea of reincarnation, this looks to be insinuating all the concepts that ties to the asava. On the other end, Buddhism aims for the end goal of liberation that they call nirvana. This is the state where an individual is fully liberated from the samsara, free from any attachments, passions, suffering, and karma, while also being described to be a state of perfect quietude and highest happiness. Although not explicitly stated, we can already imply that this is close to the definition of Anasrava as we've discussed earlier. But I cannot be sure that Anasrava is the same as nirvana in this case, especially since Fuli themselves are responsible for the universe's rebirth. Both Anasrava and Asava were placed on the opposites of each other due to their contrast over the involvement of flux. This just ties it stronger to nirvana if you consider the emphasis on both wholesomeness and happiness, which is present in our 2 pure children so far. And if nirvana frees individuals from the cycles of rebirth, then both March and Cyrene can exist independently from finality, which can explain the latter's remanifestation as ripples of past reverie. So if this is a good thing, then why is Evernight keen on erasing that title from March's memories? Here is where we explore the Eden of Blessed Insight, also known as the Pure Land of Recollection. It is said to be a realm where Fuli stands at the center, and with a databank including the records of Sam 3000, found, documenting that it is the nursery of the Remembrance, then we could infer that the pure children must have the Eden of Blessed Insight as their home. Now, this Eden of Blessed Insight was also mentioned in the story. In that part where Black Swan tried to locate Evernight, she stumbles upon a group of suspended memo keepers. When she reached the third group, the memo keepers have been driven to insanity and was distraught when the pure Child of Anasrava betrayed them. They mentioned the Eden of Blessed Insight without further lead context, but it were the ones that followed that gave us hints. We were tricked, we are the sacrifice, she just wants to find her lost sisters. Find them, kill them, reclaim them. If a new life has to be born, its seed has to be dead. I wouldn't doubt that the pure Child of Anasrava being implied here is March 7th, and the one seeking to find, kill, and reclaim is Evernight. But it's interesting here that they mention that she just wants to find her lost sisters. If these sisters were other pure children of Anasrava, then surely Evernight isn't only interested with protecting March. It is possible she might also have motives that concern Cyrene. But before that, they mentioned that Evernight through the form of the black memo sprites are the memo keeper's nemesis. This isn't surprising given that we explore the possible dynamics between Evernight and the Garden, but when they mentioned Eden of Blessed Insight, it could be an indirect lead information about Evernight. If so, this would confirm that the Enigmata was born from the Remembrance, but why? I'd like you to focus on 4 things here: the seed, Eden, trickery, and garden. Putting all of them together, the reference would be obvious. This takes some inspiration from the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, where both Adam and Eve were tempted by the evil serpent to eat the forbidden apple that is supposed to grant them knowledge. Except the analogy isn't 1:1. Adam and Eve would be compared to these memo keepers. The trickery was there, but the evil serpent could either point to March, Evernight, or the Garden. The forbidden knowledge granting apple would be the seed of remembrance, and you would notice that if we tried to force a 1:1 analogy, it would just be confusing. Well, when the Trailblazer and Danhang went further into the Great Tomb to confront Evernight, Evernight explains to them that Fuli sold a false hope to Cyrene. Later on, she revealed that, just like the erudition, the Remembrance also sided with the destruction. This doesn't make it a plausible reason why the Remembrance would be the 4th universe-ending path. Evernight explained that Iron Tomb would be a perfect catalyst in a way that if it managed to kill Nous, provided that the seed of the Remembrance has been planted, it will scatter the path's influence all throughout the cosmos, meaning the Remembrance only sees destruction through a utilitarian transition to their actual main goal. Earlier, we established that the Remembrance must have gotten into amphoreus first before the erudition, and it looks like our information about the seed of Remembrance was our confirmation all along. This seed was the Great Tomb, which was where March's first journey in amphoreus began. We knew that she's been in amphoreus for 97 days, and it was on that 97th day where she merged with Evernight. It was in the Abyss of Fate, and it was after the scepter transmitted her into the extrapolations. But what's weird here is that according to Evernight, the merging happened when she ran out of options. We had that earlier in the story when Lygus got them cornered in the Abyss of Fate. And so, it might seem like a mystery for Evernight to know about the Great Tomb unless we consider a detail about the Enigmata as confirmation. Suppose that the Enigmata being born from the Remembrance was true. We can use this to explore the how by looking into the Great Tomb. The Great Tomb, as we've known so far, is a secluded section deep into the scepter. For Lygus, this is a critical place to ensure that Iron Tomb keeps growing because the illusion that it has a head will allow it to think while being aligned to destruction. This was the main point of the prime mover of life for Lygus. He's utilizing instinct in realizing Iron Tomb. But the problem is, at the same time, this was made real because the seed of remembrance, a path that also aligned with the destruction, is technically the heart of Iron Tomb. Sure, the Demiurge does not exist, and Lygus buried the Titan deep in his memories, but that's exactly the point of the Remembrance. No memory is left behind. And throughout the section in the Great Tomb where we see multiple instances of Cyrene talking to someone as she records memories using "as I've written," it's highly likely that she is talking to this said Titan. It's the same subject that the Trailblazer and Danhang have been eager to see. see. It's in these exchanges and moments that Cyrene persisted despite getting wiped out for every iteration of the cycles. This is why the Garden are very wary of the Trailblazers getting to the Seed of Remembrance first, because they know that they can incite changes in the Great Tomb. Putting an end to Iron Tomb would equate to foiling the Remembrance's plot. But unbeknownst to the memo keepers of the Garden, this Great Tomb is a lot more volatile in both function and mystery. They did not know what's in store for them for trying to witness Noos's fall, nor did they know what lies within it. In actuality, they've gone further into their attempt so as to unknowingly present themselves as sacrifice. Same goes for Cyrene, and Evernight already knew this in full. The Garden is no different from Lygus in a way that they view existence as mere memories, similar to how Lygus sees every being as an electrical signal. But as we've discussed the concept of memory light earlier, this introduces quite an interesting dynamic because up until now, we know that Iron Tomb is still not complete. There could still be hope for Cyrene, and that is why Evernight is also after her. This could be the meaning of finding her lost sisters, with her pertaining to both Evernight and March. But notice these following details. Lygus only perceived March and not Evernight. Evernight was active when March was encased in ice, and March could only seize back control after Evernight voluntarily enters slumber. They cannot really coexist at once, so what can we get from this? Suppose that March, a pure child of Anasrava, is to have her eyes closed even with her consciousness. Given the motif of ice and light, it wouldn't be possible for light to be refracted and reflected because March wouldn't have the means to observe. This is why March had to embed herself in the camera. In the midst of merging with Evernight, she had to give up memories from her own mind. Without the camera, these memories have nowhere to go. So, when Evernight said that Iron Tomb is the perfect arc, it meant that the Remembrance can make use of the skill of havoc that Iron Tomb can bring, and within Iron Tomb, they can receive memories from a number of memo keepers alongside these pure children while also being able to observe far enough. It would be similar to giving Iron Tomb eyes or the capability to see. But the thing is, Iron Tomb is yet to be complete, so the Garden might just be over-preparing here. And that brings me to my next point. There seems to be another big stake that comes with Iron Tomb being complete aside from the known looming cosmic catastrophe. If Noos were to fall, the Remembrance would also take its share on the masterless path of erudition. They will be capable of merging the knowable certainties with memories and eventually produce truths. What makes this worrying even for the Trailblaze is that this will make the Remembrance an active path. What do I mean by active, you may ask? In the exchange between Evernight and March, March shared with Evernight about how a camera can only capture fleeting moments, and hands must be used to stitch these moments into a story. These hands pertaining to the Trailblaze is what makes such path active, and if Remembrance were to be active, it would be due to sharing into the erudition's capability of extrapolation. Remember that back when Black Swan had a conversation with Himeko about the Remembrance, she brought up the Garden's belief that the universe can be interpreted through memories. The present doesn't exist, the past making up of memoria, and the future only being a possibility that eventually becomes memoria as well. Should the path earn the capability to extrapolate, then they are not only interpreting memories, but they can also shape things using memories. This would mean that they get to impose the future based on the past and erase the data of the present due to the extrapolation running even the most minute of events. This would put the universe at risk of reliving the same exact events again and again, as if everything that would happen is just a matter of deja vu. This is accurately fitting considering amphoreus has these eternal recurrences. Maybe the entire experiment is already serving as a precedence on what's to come when erudition and remembrance meet. You already get implications of worlds repeating the same mistakes over and over again in the recounting of Fuli's essence in the databank, but at least everyone still gets to retain even the illusion of choice. If Fuli gets to actively reshape the universe and not just observe, then they can produce the most uncanny loop of existence similar to the samsara of the Sub-Zero's festival in Genshin. Choices would be rendered completely insignificant, as every being will be made aware of each extrapolated same outcome, tormented in consciousness of this futility, and completely subjugated by the never-ending repetition of the same destiny made from the same pool of memoria made manifest. The universe would be nothing but a memory that lives itself. However, there is another implication with the Remembrance path being active. As of now, the Remembrance still is mostly about recording memories, and as long as Iron Tomb is yet to be complete, these memories will remain to be in the state of inertia. But this type of inertia is rather paradoxical because why would a non-existing entity be able to possess the ability to hold memories? The thing is, even though there are non-existent memories, these still are possibly branching interpretations of other existing ones. It wouldn't make sense for, let's say, someone who is yet to be born, for example, to be capable of holding memories. The case for Iron Tomb was that it constantly learns from the extrapolations, and without Ligus stimulating its instincts, it would never be this close to completion. Anything that is embedded within the Great Tomb wasn't part of the amphoreus extrapolations, and so the scepter wouldn't be able to process data that comes from that location. Such is the case for March, Evernight, and the Ripples of Past Reverie. Its contents were only added to the extrapolations after the Trailblazer has downloaded the Forgotten Years logs using As I've Written as key for data transfer. However, these would be the same memories that would overwrite the logic of Era Nova, which basically tells us that memories have the capacity to change the extrapolations. But we erased this a while ago with the possibility of Remembrance shouldering a share on the masterless path of erudition should Noos's death actually happen. What difference does this make now? As of present, not only is Iron Tomb yet to be complete, but Noos is still an existing Aeon, so the ability of extrapolation isn't part of the Remembrance yet. The emphasis here would be about the effect of the memories, that surely there is a specific property without these downloaded memories that caused the scepter to change its course. And since As I've Written has been with the Trailblazer throughout their journeys in Amphoreus, they might have had major influence on how the scepter took in the data of the Forgotten Years. Surely enough, the Trailblazer was vital in this process because not only did they get Fuli's gaze, their interpretations would also prove to be valuable for this benefiting path. Interpretation is what makes the Remembrance an active path even without the ability to extrapolate. And with this, we can make sense of how memories can be put to use in the yet-to-be-born Iron Tomb. If we resume the line of thinking that the Remembrance can be equated to giving Iron Tomb eyes, then the workings of the memories in this case would be Iron Tomb with its eyes closed. Somehow it fits, because the scepter is still extrapolating. When the memories were supplemented and has overwritten the logic of Era Nova, we can picture this as Iron Tomb being subjected in a dream and implanting an imagination foreign to the scepter's main directives. This is definitely one of the ways Ligus's plan can be fully sabotaged, and I think both Evernight and Cyrene already saw this approach, although in different interpretations. That brings us again to the question of how the Enigmata was born from the Remembrance, and here is my answer. The Enigmata is once an active aspect of the Remembrance, one that is capable of the manipulation of perception. The reason Evernight wants to snuff Fuli out is due to the fact that what's left of the Remembrance is what could put March, the other pure children, the Trailblaze, and the universe in danger. Should Iron Tomb be completed, and should the Remembrance be scattered throughout the cosmos as an aftermath of Noos's destruction, the light of this path will blind everything, subjecting anyone and anything to a perpetual loop of lived memory in full consciousness. At this point, the Remembrance is only capable of observing and retaining. If they could extrapolate, every minute unfolding of destiny would repeat like an eternal deja vu. The sacrifice of the garden and their conspiracy favors this Remembrance, and this is why Evernight is looking out for March and Cyrene, since the garden knew the nature of the pure children of Anasrava. They were once part of Fuli, that those of the likes of March and Cyrene were brought to existence thanks to the shattering of Fuli's divine vessel. Evernight might have once been a pure child carrying this aspect of Fuli, that is capable of manipulation, that eventually grew to be its own path of the Enigmata. After all, Fuli's existence, which manifests as the concept of light, would still acknowledge its blind side. Those that are unseen, those that are uncertain, and those that are left in darkness. Cyrene, or we should say the Ripples of Past Reverie, is also wary of the garden, but despite being strongly tied to the Remembrance, she too carries another aspect of Fuli, the capacity to interpret. This is the part of Remembrance that sides with the Trailblaze, but the part that stands among the likes of destruction, harmony, and nihility is one that is capable of turning the entire cosmos into prisoners of suffocating light, subjected to eternal recurrence. And as long as Iron Tomb is yet to be complete, and there are still room for darkness and the unexplored to just be in the universe, the cosmos still has a chance to grasp on to their freedom. that by knowing and by challenging what they know and remember, they can run to the future of newer possibilities that cannot be imagined nor extrapolated. Because, after all, this is the nirvana that the remembrance can never promise, and as long as there is Anasrava, there is always a leverage for the garden to use this lie to keep them in the same pure samsara. Only by declaring these lies dead can new life be born. Hope you enjoyed and got something from this long video, and I wish you all a wonderful day. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.